Hey everybody. Yeah, that's working, isn't it? You can hear me in the back? Yay! Cool. All right. So yeah, 3 years ago I came to PNSQC and my company had just finished their first year of legit Agile indoctrination, I guess is the best way to put it. We'd been sort of halfway doing it for a while, but then we stepped up to the plate. We brought in an Agile consultant. We went full biscuits Agile, or at least we thought we did. And so what I was talking about is how that went and what happened to us. And I did promise at the time I would come back and talk about what happened next. So, and Bhushan did a pretty groovy job of introducing me. But so that you know a little bit about me, I've been a QA engineer. I've been in the business for at least, well, a little over 20 years. I've been a Scrum Master for the last 5 years. I was part of the halfway implementation, and then I was part of the full implementation. So I've been torturing people with Scrum now for quite a while. And then I wanted to get a little feel for the folks I'm talking to. So were any of you at my talk 3 years ago? Oh, cool. Excellent. And then how many of you work at places that have actually implemented Agile? And I don't mean like halfway, I mean like for legit real. Cool. And hopefully we'll talk about the difference between just kind of scooting through and actually getting her done. Did it stick? That's another thing I'm curious about. A lot of companies sort of do it, and they start, and then as time goes on, they wander down, and it becomes this sort of weird, gooey thing that's not really Agile and not really waterfall and not really much of anything. So, cool. All right, and I will try. I have a tendency to get faster as I speak, so I'll try to not run. I also don't hear particularly well, so if you have a question, just wave your hand and I'll catch. Yes?
Do you know if your presentation from 3 years ago was recorded?
It was not recorded. My slides are online and the paper is online. So let's go ahead and get started. So 3 years ago, as I talked about, we were in the early stages of our Agile Scrum implementation. And we were kind of attempting to learn it from our failure. I sort of took a step back and said, well, we're a year into this. How are we doing? And I realized that, you know, we had some good things and some bad things. Since then, we've really evolved a lot. Back then, it was kind of wild and hairy, and now we've kind of focused in a little bit better. And our processes have most definitely matured. So, my apologies to the possum lovers in the crowd. But this image, I'm also kind of a graphic thinker. This image pretty much tells you everything you need to know about how our implementation was going. We got it done, but it clearly wasn't perfect. And the longer you look at this, the better it gets. Because at some point, somebody said, it's not my job. Not only did they say it's not my job, but they're like, but I got it done anyway. And that's pretty much where we were. When we initially trained our people, we only trained the developers, the QA, the people we wanted to be POs, and the people we wanted to be Scrum Masters. We didn't tell the rest of the company. We didn't train anyone else in any of the other departments. We just trained the initial folks. So in a lot of cases, we were interacting with marketing and salespeople that they knew we were doing a Scrum, but they had no idea what that was, and they thought maybe we were playing rugby. So they just had no idea. And the other half of the company was completely waterfall. So the end result of that is that our POs ended up doing this weird interpretive dance where they had to explain Scrum waterfall style so that everybody else knew what we were up to. So that's the inconsistent understanding. In trying to make things work better, we would take our Scrum teams, and about every 6 months, we would put everybody in a bag and shake the bag and then reorganize all the teams, because somehow that would make things better. Not so much. We were also really not very good at laying out our projects and organizing them. So we would bite off great big huge chunks, and to make our commitments, we would then savage the teams that were working on future work, pull those people off, and put them on the teams that were trying to get the work we'd committed to done. So we were always robbing Peter to pay Paul. Another interesting thing we had was we didn't understand the rules of Scrum very well. So we had, sometimes the BAs were doing the PO job, sometimes managers were doing the PO job. But ultimately, the people that were acting as the POs didn't necessarily understand what they were doing, and that made for some pretty fun times. We had non-existent backlogs or backlogs that were created on the fly. And anybody that's ever done that knows that it has a tendency to not end super well. We also had top-down project scheduling. The voice would come down from above and say, you will have this done at this date. That's awesome. That's really super duper Scrum-like. And it resulted in some pretty odd side effects, like we quit putting points on stories. There's no point to it. We had to get the stories done. We had a date where we needed to get them done. Points are for weenies. So that's where we were. Since then, we've changed a few things. Each team now has a business analyst that's assigned to the team. It's the business analyst's job to work with our product owner, who's usually a project manager, and they create the stories for our backlog, which is great because we're walking in, the product owner knows what the team is capable of, the business analyst knows what the team needs to do, and the two of them work in concert to come up with a reasonable list of stories and a reasonable set of deadlines. You know, the product owner comes in and says, I'm pretty sure we can get that done really safely in January, as opposed to, whenevs. So the other nice thing is, and this is going to sound odd, but the business analysts are not our product owners. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of separation between church and state, because the business analysts, it's their job to get the features out as quickly as possible. So they're going to want to jam as much as they can into the pipeline. Whereas when the product owner is a project manager, the project manager can put the brakes on because it's in their best interest to deliver everything on time. They're on-time people. So they put the brakes on when needed and they step on the gas when they can. Once we get the stories, we groom our stories interactively with our business analysts. My particular team likes little bite-sized stories, and we're not shy about kicking stories back. Don't have enough acceptance criteria? Have another, take it back. Let us know when you come up with something we can work with. Yes?
So who defines the acceptance criteria for you?
The BA does, unless we've written a story for ourselves. But by and large, the BAs draft our acceptance criteria, and if they're not clear enough or they don't have enough detail, we kick them back. The other thing we like to do is if our stories, like I said, are too big, we'll define, we think you can split the story here, so please write us 2 stories. So that way we always have bite-sized chunks. We've changed how we set up, how we prioritize stories. The top of the organization drives the priorities. We need to accomplish these things, and they create what's called a seating plan, which are the things we need to accomplish for that year, hopefully. Then we as teams go back and we look at the seating plan and we say, we can do that, not happening, maybe. So it helps establish where we're gonna go and how much we can reasonably get done in a year. That way they're not committing to things we can't provide. And we're not working till midnight every day forever and always. Let's see. There are cases where disparate teams are delivering pieces of software that need to go together. In that case, it is the job of the PO to coordinate, which makes sense. That's what you would expect, and that's the way we do it. Another nice thing that's changed is back then we had 3 or 4 tools to control our stories and our test cases, and it was just a mess. We never knew what tool to use when, and now we're actually using a single tool to do all of our work. And that helps us a lot. We use a thing called target process, which we can talk about later if anybody's super interested in it. And the last thing is our team membership is more consistent. You don't leave a team now unless you want to. If I have to look at one more report, I'm going to lose my mind. Then they ship you to another team. That way you don't burn out, but you're also not getting swapped every 5 minutes, which is a whole bucket load of awesome that gets really tiresome.
I don't want to derail your whole talk, but
Sure.
It seems like I'm hearing some things that don't seem kind of consistent with this is normally, so I just want to make sure I understand correctly. You said that the business BAs, they're not product owners, but they're the ones that write acceptance criteria.
Yes.
That seems non-standard. I always thought that the product owners wrote acceptance criteria.
It is a little bit non-standard, but because our BAs are writing our user stories, they're the ones that understand what it is that our partners are looking for.
Are your BAs representatives from the business side?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the BAs are representatives from the business side. So our POs literally are our project managers. It's a little wonky, but it is a little wonky.
Well, to have like product owner acting as a project manager. Okay.
Yes.
You're just doing it a little differently.
Yeah.
It works for you guys. So.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that.
Okay.
I saw another hand pop up.
I was going to say that we have a model where the PAs do a lot of the story writing.
Uh-huh.
Product owners are just truly doing product work. They're not managing the projects or programs. And they're writing the feature level and every level. I PAs do a lot of the teams. That's all.
Yeah, and we actually have someone above the BAs that actually does the epic level stuff and then kicks it down. And you had a hand up as well.
I was going to say the same thing. We have a similar model to that. And the POs can basically focus on what the stakeholders need.
Mhm.
The VA, QA fight them a lot because we're trying to push things through and we're like pulling brakes as well.
Yeah, and in our case, our POs, because they're a part of our team and they're kind of independent of the requirements work, they're not vested in getting those features out. So they have a tendency, they're the ones that go toe-to-toe with the BAs and say, no, it's not happening, which is kind of nice. We have a built-in defender of the cause, or at least a defender of our sanity. So, are we good? Cool. Okay. So, we talked about the things that changed. Some of the things that stayed the same. We actually kept most of Scrum, other than what we already talked about. We try to do demos. We're fanatic about our user stories. We are fanatic about our planning. We do our stand-ups, and we're also pretty religious about our retrospectives. And I'll talk about when we vary from that and why. We also did, in fact, retain some bad stuff because nobody's perfect. When you join my company, we throw you on a Scrum team and wish you well. There is no training. We don't have a consistent training process, and we do know about that. And unfortunately, the rest of the company is better, but they still don't entirely grok what it is that we're doing. They just know that magically software keeps pumping out of this machine and they like it. So hopefully we'll get some more education going there as well. So, yes?
Heather, I apologize, I should have asked this right at the beginning.
Sure.
What does your company do?
We build tests for kids, so growth tests. And interestingly, I'm going to squirrel off here for just a second. 4 years ago or 3 years ago when I gave the talk, they asked me not to reveal my company. My company didn't want to be identified, but they're actually good with it now. So anyway,
Okay, thank you.
yeah. Let's see. So this is what our teams look like now. And this is all the teams. We have 14 Scrum teams right now. They're all siloed, which is not great. Everybody works on their particular thing, and they tend to work on it in isolation unless they have to reach out and touch another team. They have very varied methodologies. I did a little survey I sent out to all of the Scrum Masters, and I found out some really interesting stuff, like some of them are using Kanban, some of them are using straight up Scrum, some are kind of Scrumfall, some are doing a thing with a thing and they're not entirely sure what they're doing, but it's kind of Scrummy, so it feels good. Let's see. Most of the teams do 2-week sprints. A few do 1-week sprints. But all of the teams, they are Scrummish at some level. No one has gone off the deep end. No one has reverted to waterfall. And nobody's doing something that's just so wackadoodle that it's completely worthless. all the teams are doing Scrum on some level, and you can identify it as Scrum if you look at it. Let's see. So another squirrely bit of information is when I'm not doing this, I train donkeys, so I had to put a donkey slide in. The guy on the end there with the split ears, that was my very first Scrum team. That's how they felt about the process. They were like, seriously? But over the years, my teams have been pretty consistent, so I thought that was really appropriate with the 4 donkeys because they all look kind of the same. My teams, we do stand-ups, and here's on Monday we walk the board. Tuesdays and Fridays, a lot of my team works from home those days, so we do a communication via email. And then Thursdays, we do just a regular stand-up, 5-minute get-together, chit-chat. Wednesdays are special. Wednesdays, even though we have 2-week sprints, on Wednesdays, we have our planning meeting. And we do a planning meeting every Wednesday, which is kind of cool. The first Wednesday of the sprint is, of course, the actual sprint planning meeting, where we figure out what how we did last sprint, what stories we didn't finish and we need to kick forward, and then we pull in enough stories to, we think, get us through the sprint. The second Wednesday of the sprint is kind of a check-in. We walk the board, and then we go, we're rocking it, this is great, or oh my God, we need more work to do, or we're behind, how do we fix it? And that's how our PO has an opportunity then to do corrective action. These are the stories you absolutely have to get done. These are the things that can slip. So that's our opportunity to sort of figure out where we are as a team. The other thing we do during that second planning meeting, I saw your hand. The other thing we do during that second planning meeting is that's when we do our grooming. We groom our stories then. So we actually don't have to have a separate meeting for story grooming, which is super nice. That's like an hour or 2 of your week you get back. And everybody loves an extra hour.
So your 2-week sprints start on a Wednesday?
They start on a Tuesday, and that's the whole company uses, or the whole engineering team uses Tuesday as our start day, but we actually do our planning on Wednesday. So, and it works out. So yeah, we do our planning meetings. We try to demo pretty often. When we first started, everybody was adamant, we will demo every sprint. And what happened is we had a lot of 5-minute demos that took 3 hours to put together. So over time, we've migrated. We demo when we have something to show. We don't store it up, but by the same token, we don't just demo for the sake of demoing. Look, it's the letter M. We made an M. Yeah, no one cares about the letter M. But people do care if we only demo when we have something interesting to show. As I talked about, we retrospect. I use the same retrospective technique every time. And what that does is my team knows what's coming. They know I don't have to explain the wonky rules or anything. They just know what I'm going to do. And we'll use that same technique for as long as it works. And then as soon as it stops working, we do a new one. The one I'm using now is kind of fun. Everybody comes in and I make them draw a emoticon about how they're feeling about the sprint. And what that does is it gets everybody engaged. If you have to go up on the board and draw a silly smiley face or whatever, it makes everybody laugh. So all of a sudden, everybody's engaged, we're laughing, we're chatting. And then once I've got everybody engaged, everybody gets to write down one thing that affected them during the course of the sprint. Good effect, bad effect, just an effect. And what it does is it forces them to really think about what affected them. They can't just write down a bunch of scribbles and slap it up there and then we have a 6-hour conversation about all the stuff. They have to really think about the one thing that bothered them or excited them or made them happy. And that seems to focus everybody. And it's really interesting because the one thing tends to line up across the team. It'll be variations, but it'll all come down to a similar theme, which is kind of neat. Let's see. And then chartering. Whenever I take on a new team, the first thing I have them do, I usually let the team go a couple of sprints to get used to each other, and then we charter. And I don't know how many of you folks have done a chartering exercise, but it's a process of going through and figuring out how a team wants to do business, what they care about, and how they care about it. You know, what is our goal as a team? We know what we're supposed to be doing, but what do we really want to do? And when my teams first find out they're going to charter, they're like, well, this is going to be silly. But what ends up happening is at some point while we're working together, somebody says, well, why are we doing something the way we're doing it? And I point back to the charter and I say, because you said you wanted to do it that way. Oh. And it helps them remember why it is they do what they do, or it helps them figure out that they don't really want to do it that way anymore, and then we'll change the charter. So I find that it's a worthy exercise to repeat. And of course, the ultimate goal of all of this, the goal we've had all along, and the goal I've had as a Scrum Master, is to the best of my abilities, respect and preserve the Scrum ceremonies, but still being mindful of time. The process we have now, at least on my teams, is 3 years of what do we need to do this and get our jobs done well? You know, what don't we need? Where can I save you as much time as possible? Because I'm sure not very many engineers walk up to your desk and say, can you schedule more meetings for me? I haven't had nearly enough meetings this week, so let's get some more meetings in there. Not a conversation I have very often with my engineers. So that's what our process, or at least my process, has been all about. Yes?
Can you elaborate a little bit on
The chartering?
Yeah, like how do you conduct that?
What I do is, and I don't think I have that on a slide, unfortunately, there's a certain set of goals we want to accomplish. So we want a vision statement, a mission statement. There are some words. I have the team come up with a set of words that express how they want to work or what's important to them: integrity, simplicity. And then I have them come up with a statement about that. We will strive to be as simple as possible in all of our interactions. And then we come up with a list of ways that we're going to accomplish that. It's basically simple rules that help us accomplish that. And also tests so that we know when we're doing it right. You know, maybe one of our goals is to release as often as possible. So then we'll have a test that says, you know, releases go out every day. So it makes them think through the process of how they want to do business and then how they're going to verify that they're doing business the way they want to do it. Does that make sense? Is that kind of what you were looking for?
So it's more like a team agreement?
Yes. Yeah, it's basically a set of working agreements. It just has a structure. So here's the next bit. What we've learned. So where I work, sometimes Scrum really, really works well, and sometimes it really, really doesn't. Scrum really works well when the availability is predictable but not precise. So we can deliver sometime in February or March. When the projects are smallish, you know, 5-6 sprints or less. Basically, they want the feature, but it doesn't have to be done yesterday, and it's easy to manage. We also do something called Scrum Fall, and that's where we sort of revert to waterfall. Yeah, it comes in. A project will come in. It happened to us actually this winter. We decided we wanted to re-architect our entire front end product. Yeah. So we went and asked, can we go quiet for 3 months while we re-architect this thing? And they said, yes, but you have exactly 3 months to do it, and if you don't finish in the end of 3 months, not so good. There is no fail. So we did just that. We went dark for 3 months, and what we did is we kind of coasted on the fact that we have pretty good Scrum behavior because we had groomed all the stories we needed to accomplish that re-architecture. And what we did is we tossed them all into our current sprint. So we had some ridiculous number of stories in our sprint, and we had them in priority order, and we just started knocking them off. And then at the end of that sprint, instead of having a planning meeting, we did have a planning meeting, but it consisted of moving everything down to the next sprint that we hadn't finished, sort of looking at what we'd done, and figuring out, you know, are we going to make it? What do we need to do to make it? Do we need to work harder? Do we need to, prune some stuff out? So our planning meeting basically became a quick evaluation and a strategy meeting. Where are we? Where do we need to be? How do we fix it? When Scrum Waterfall works better, if you've got a hard stop date like we did, thou shalt be finished at the end of March, or there will be heck to pay. Or when it's a really large project, and that really was a large project. It was just the best and easiest way to do it. So the other interesting thing we found is that points really do matter. I talked about when we first started, when we were given a flat deadline to meet, we didn't care about points because we were going to have to do it anyway. Once you actually get into a true Scrum Agile situation, actually understanding how many points a sprint your team can do under normal circumstances and under dire circumstances is good. And understanding how to point stories is super helpful. My team has a rule: we don't do 8-point stories. If we see an 8-point story, our inclination is almost always to split it, and very seldom are we not able to split it. The other interesting thing we discovered is that we didn't need Fibonacci numbers. For some reason, I forget the first time it happened, but somebody said, well, this story is not quite 5 points, but it's not quite 3 points. What do we do? And I said, let's put 4 points on it and see what happens. And you know what? Nobody died. So we actually have 1-point stories, 2-point stories, 3-point stories, 4-point stories, and 5-point stories. We also don't do, I know half-point is an option. We don't do that because we've discovered that if it's a half-point story, it's actually better to make it a 1-point story, and that gives us extra time for testing. So we kind of pad a little bit as we go so that we're always sort of over-delivering, and nobody ever gets upset when you deliver early, at least not very often.
Just a point of reference.
Uh-huh.
The 5-point story is typically how many work days?
It's about 3-ish days of teamwork. Yeah. So we, in my particular group, QA and Dev are very tightly linked. So we look at, when we put points on a story, it's how much is this going to take the whole team to do. We try to complete the whole story in the same sprint. We don't have that cute thing where, Dev does it and then tosses it over the wall to QA and QA finishes it the next sprint. We try to get the whole story done in the same sprint. And if it starts to happen that QA gets behind, then we go back and we try to look at what's going wrong, that QA is getting stuck with a huge pile of stories to test.
For the sprint capacity planning, how many hours do you transfer, like a work hours?
We actually don't talk in work hours. We talk in points. Yeah, there are no hours. So
how do you do the capacity planning? Just based on points?
Based on points. And actually, I believe, if I remember properly, so this tool, actually, this is my whiteboard at work. And I actually really, really love this. This is one of the things. So you can see here, that was Christmas. So we thought we might be able to do 30 points. Clearly that didn't work out. We got 10 points done. And then right after Christmas was the snowpocalypse. And that messed with our ability to get work done. And this is when we started that project I was talking about, where we just dumped everything into our backlog. So we had 71 points, 87 points, 65 points. And then we actually finished, and we went back to our normal. This is more sort of a normal setup for us. That particular team's velocity was between 25 and 30 points. Clearly we had a little bump here. I can't remember what happened. But we know, for each team, we know basically how many points they're capable of. My current team does about 40 points a sprint.
How much overtime were they working during sprints?
I have no idea, but I know it was a lot. They let us work from home, so I think there was a lot of midnight hours that nobody ever saw, but that actually happened. But we promised we would get it done, and we got it done. So
What's your dev to QA ratio?
we are. It varies. It's usually around 2 to 1. Sometimes it's 1 to 1 and 1.5 to 1. So
What's the question?
the QA to dev ratio. we're actually pretty high. So it makes it nice because there's somebody dedicated to following a particular, well, basically as fast as the stories get developed, we're testing them.
So the question I asked that was because when you say you do the capacity planning based on the points, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you then make sure that you have enough work for all of them in QA, like you're load balancing the work through the sprint?
Right. So during our planning process, and I did see your hand go up, I promise. During our planning process, one of the questions I as Scrum Master ask is, does everybody have enough work to get through to next Wednesday? Because we're always about next Wednesday. And then when we get to next Wednesday, I ask the question again. So if it happens that the devs have enough work and the QA don't, then the next question is, what can we do for you to get you more work to do? And it's usually that's where we kick in automation. Oh, you don't have very much to do? Well, why don't you automate this thing that we've been wanting to automate since, ever?
How do you account for that in your sprint?
We'll add a story for it. So that's what, if you see these stars here, that's what the stars are telling me is that we actually added work to the sprint. So, and then there was,
What are the advantages of 2 weeks versus 3 longer, 3 or 4 weeks?
I've never done a 3 or 4 week sprint, but I know from my experience that if you have a team that wants to do 3 or 4 week sprints, they're wanting to go waterfall on you. Back when we first implemented Scrum, we had a couple teams that didn't really believe in Scrum, and they wanted 3 and 4 week sprints really badly. And the reason they wanted it was so that they could do all of their planning up front and then do all of their development and all of their QA inside of that box. So that's why you want them cute and small, because it kind of forces you, it reinforces the Scrum paradigm. And then
Also, does the demo side of it as well, 3 or 4 weeks, show and not just iterate the
exactly. Exactly. And then you had a question.
I was curious with the QA, if somebody was sick or you're low on QA during this, do you ever have the developers?
Oh yeah. Yeah, she asked if something happens to a QA, do we ever have our developers test? And the answer is, of course, absolutely. I've never been fond of developers that aren't willing to test. So, and thankfully on my team, my developers are very good-natured about it. And if I ask them to step up and test, they will absolutely step up and test. They're not allowed to, of course, test their own stuff, but they can test each other. And I usually only let them do menial testing. So.
Are you using automation?
We use automation where we can. We use Nightwatch, which is a fairly new tool. But it actually is pretty effective. We like it. So, any other questions before I move on? And actually, how are we doing? Oh, excellent. Okay. I did slow down significantly from last time. All right. So, and I promise we're winding down. So, I still have questions, and we actually are bringing in a couple of, they're scaled agile consultants. They're going to help us out. But these are questions I've actually asked of them, and they're cogitating on answers for me. So our teams have been asked every sprint to publish one item that we're gonna improve on for the next, going forward. So is continuous improvement continuously necessary? What's happened is our retrospectives have now turned into a quest to generate that item. And I'm really worried that instead of talking about things we need to improve, things that are broken on the team, we're focused on coming up with that one item so that we get the little checkbox next to our name that said that we accomplished our goal. So I'm worried about that. I also worry about the fact that we have 14 teams doing Scrum 14 different ways. My particular group actually there are 5 teams that do reporting. And even across those 5 teams, and we all sit in the same room together, they all do it differently. The front end teams are kind of similar, and the back end teams are just way different. How is that? Is that okay? If I get picked up and moved from my team to another team, do I then lose my mind because the world is so different? So, how okay is that?
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
In that example, if I do believe in diversity and geolocated different avenues of data, what's the definition of done for each of these teams? How different is the aspect of how it is like that? Is that where you see the difference, or is that more common across?
They're all different. Oh, I mean, ultimately the definition of done is, for us, is that it's been tested, it's been developed, it's been tested, and it's ready for deployment. But how they get to that state is drastically different, or can be drastically different. Yes.
So when you say they are, some teams do 2 weeks and the others do 1 or so. So when they deploy, do they all deploy at the same time? Do they hurry back on deploying, or is there silos?
We have a monthly release train most teams have a monthly release train. We are slowly going towards CI/CD, but it's a slow and painful march. So in the meantime, we have a monthly release train. So we all release on that same train. So,
No matter when you finish your release.
right. Once it's finished, it gets checked into the master branch, and then the week before our deadline, we do an integration build, which becomes basically our release candidate. We test that, it goes to master, and then we ship it, which is shockingly old school. So we do have a few teams that have, like my team has Dockerized some of our stuff, and we're very close to CI/CD, but now we're fighting the fight that our integration folks and our release folks, CI/CD scares the bejeebers out of them. They're afraid we're going to let some cat out of the bag that's going to destroy the planet. So they're still struggling with the concept of releasing software the hot second it's ready. So we're working on that. They will come to the dark side eventually. Did I get everybody's questions? Yes.
Mine was kind of more of a comment. So the second point you have about teams being different, is it okay? I think that's really hard to say yes or no.
Yeah.
So it's really dependent on the team. So we're very focused where we're focused on being flexible, allowing everyone. So we all do Scrum, but we do it in different ways.
Yeah.
They're not all in the order that you had. So sometimes we mix them up, but as long as you get to that end result, you really kind of get.
Yeah, and like I said, that's why I have is it okay? Because it's kind of Scrum-like that's part of the point, is that you sort of mutate the process to suit your needs. But is it okay to be that different across 14 teams? I don't know. Yeah, it's just one of those dark questions that I haven't gotten answered yet. Something that we've also had happen a couple of times is we've joined teams together to get a bunch of work done for whatever reason, and that gets weird. Then you have 2 Scrum Masters, and theoretically one person isn't a Scrum Master anymore, but they have trouble giving up the reins. We usually have like a senior dev that controls what gets checked in. That gets weird. So it seems like there ought to be a better way to do it, but we haven't found it yet. And then I have this one's kind of a fun one. I'm picking on somebody. I have a long-going debate with one of the managers. I invite managers to retrospectives, but then I tell them, we really love you, but please don't show up. He claims that if he's doing his job right, it shouldn't be a problem for him to be in the retrospective. And my claim is that, well, that's great that you're doing your job, but not everybody is as awesome as you are. And even if he is an awesome manager, there may be something that comes up that his people want to talk about without him there. So I tell him, you're more than welcome to come to the retrospective, but please don't. So, let's see, where are we? Oh, yay! We're wrapping up. Yeah, I couldn't help myself. So the good, Scrum works, or at least it has worked for us for the last 4 years. If you follow the bones of the process, you actually get the results. Who knew that was possible? The bad parts, stuff that I've already talked about, the variability across the teams, inconsistent process across the teams. Some teams are really good about documenting, some teams aren't, and that comes with the variability. My teams, I'm kind of a freak about test cases and stuff, so my teams do a really good job of documenting, but not all of them do. Transferring teams can be a little bit weird because you get to the new team and you find out they do it completely differently than you do. And as I talked about, we don't have a really inconsistent or a really cohesive indoctrination process for new hires. We bring you in, welcome you to the team, and then cut you loose. And good luck. The ho-hum part, because I had to justify ho-hum. So when we first started Scrum, it was all about Scrum. we're going to do this, and we're going to do it very Scrum-like. And we were focused on the Scrum and the process, and all of the Scrum Masters were getting together once a week to have warm, fuzzy support sessions and figure out how to make things work. We're 4 years into it now, and we've pretty much completely internalized the process. We do development, and we use Scrum to do it. It's become the underlying structure, and it's not out in front anymore. It's where it belongs, in the background, politely doing its job. And it's kind of nice. You know, we have this structure that's dependable, and there's comfort in that. You don't have to think about it anymore. It just is happening. So that's it's the whole hum, but it's actually the really cool part of the whole show, is that it's just there and it's doing what it's supposed to do. So, and we'll have a chance for questions here in a second, but I just wanted to do my thanks, because my poor husband, he's a cowboy. He doesn't actually, he's not super hot on technology. He has a computer, but he's not entirely sure how it works. And yet he listens to me yap about this stuff all the time, and he just puts up with it. And of course, my Scrum teams, because they've been my guinea pigs for the last 4 years, patiently putting up with me and all of my weird things that I like to try. My manager actually puts in my goals every year that I have to write a paper for PNSQC. So they let me write on company time. Yeah, which is fantabulous. And NWEA, of course, for letting me do this on company time. And then thank you all for coming to the show. I really appreciate having a room of people to talk to, even if it is kind of random ramblings. So.
Yeah, any more questions?
I have one.
Yes.
So you mentioned you have 14 teams who are doing Scrum in 14 different ways.
Yes.
Are they using common points of measurement to determine what's working or not across all of them?
Nope. That's part of the fun. Like I said, some teams are getting, we know that teams are getting software out, clearly, and the teams have variable levels of quality, but that's it. You know, we're basically judging them on, are we hot fixing their stuff all the time or not? So, and then I saw another question.
Question there, yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious kind of where you guys are at with automation. You mentioned it, we've been doing agile, and a lot of stuff you said is very familiar. And the trend is more about maybe testing first, automation, and that's been the struggle right now with the agile and bringing all that in.
Each of our teams is different. Some teams, the software we do actually spans a huge range. So some of it is really, really amenable to automation, and some of it isn't. My team's in the middle. We build time into our sprints for automation, and it just becomes one of those, it's a story that just goes in. Now, as we write test cases, our software has the ability to mark a test case as needs automation. So we do that as we go. So we have a backlog of test cases that we know need to be automated. So, and that's how we track it.
Did you say you can include in your story points time to automate?
No, we should, and that's one of our goals to do long term, is to include that. But we just haven't reached the point where we can automate while we're doing it, unfortunately, and that's That's definitely bad.
I have one more question back there, one there. Right.
So like when you're going from...
Can you speak up a little bit, sorry?
Yeah. So when you're going from like the first starting stages of like, okay, we're going to try this Scrum thing to, oh, how much boring, we just got under this control. Like how long did that take to get to that point?
For the whole process, I think it took a couple years. One of the interesting things is when we first started, whenever I suggested something new, or whenever the mindset was, oh my God, if we don't do this right, people are going to die. And I had to, literally every week or every 2 weeks, they'd say, we'd agree to try something. And I'm like, it's okay if this doesn't work. Nobody's going to die. It just doesn't work, and we'll try something different next time. But there's that whole, I guess it comes from the waterfall thing, where if you try something, you're then stuck with it for the next year. And in Scrum, you're only stuck with it for a week or two until you have another chance to get together as a team and go, oh, that whole banana thing totally didn't work out. Let's try a pair instead. You know, and they do eventually get over themselves, but it takes longer than you think.
Any question?
Yeah.
I have an answer for your question here.
Yes.
Daddy.
Yeah, I put up the question in Google just to see what I got, and this popped up, and I just really thought it was fun. So.
Any other questions? I would very much like you to guys go ahead and
take this away or put the comments, review the speaker. We want the feedback. Without that, we can't really improve.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I'd like to mention she has graciously offered to fill in for one of our
Oh.
speakers who had a medical emergency and will not be here tomorrow for Meet the Speakers during the lunch hour. So maybe that would be an opportunity to continue this conversation. I certainly have a lot of more questions.
Uh-oh.
If you're interested, I think you'll be at table 9 tomorrow. It'll be on the list of tables.
Yeah. Or if you have any questions about donkeys.
Thank you, Thank you, Shauna. Anything else? Anybody else? No? No more questions? Let's give it a
Okay. Thank you, everybody.